misery loves company. And so whenever you have any kind of success, especially in a public social media world, the trolls are going to be there. And it's not necessarily because they don't like what you're doing. It's because they're probably jealous of what you're doing and because they're miserable in their own lives and they want to try to bring you down to their level and make you as miserable as they are. Ignore it. I ignore it. Means nothing to me. And so any piece of content I put up that people might look at and cringe, for the most part, I can shrug my shoulders and say, yeah, is what it is. Deal with it. And that's how I would look at it.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by a name you know. I'm joined by the one and only Jimmy Van from Fightful and Know Your News. So welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Mr. Tom Talks Rubbish. I was telling you that this is actually the very first Fightful related interview I've ever done that was not conducted by a Fightful staffer. And it might be the only one I ever do because this isn't the kind of thing that I seek out. But I heard about your story and I respected the fact that you won't let physical limitation slow you down. I respect your perseverance, and that's why I'm doing this. So ask away, anything you want, totally open book.
I really appreciate that. So if we take this back to the beginning, where do you first discover wrestling as a fan?
So I'm an older guy, Tom. And back in 1985, when the first WrestleMania happened, I was 10. And I distinctly remember, so back then there was no pay-per-view. They had closed circuit. And that means that you had to go to arenas to watch it on a big screen. That's all they had back then. And I distinctly remember a friend of mine getting off the school bus. He had gone to WrestleMania 1. And he had the Andre the Giant LJN action figure in his hand when he got off that school bus. That's my very first memory about pro wrestling. And I haven't looked back since.
So when your friend has this figure, what's your reaction? Is it like, this is cool, or is it sort of a dismissive? What's your reaction?
No, I was fascinated. He told me about, so WrestleMania 1, Andre the Giant slammed Big John Studd. If anybody remembers, it's a long time ago. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T were in the main event. He was telling me about everything that happened. And to this day, that very Andre the Giant figure, that specific one, I own it. So I've had it now for I don't know how many years that is. As we speak, my kid is probably beating the shit out of it because I gave it to him. Am I allowed to swear on this, by the way?
Yeah, you're cool.
Okay, good. So I still own that LJN. And no, I was fascinated by everything that he had to tell me. And I've been a fan ever since that day.
So when you do become fascinated, do you start seeking content out, like the pay-per-view itself, information? What's your next step?
So there was no pay-per-view back then.
Of course, because it was closed circuit. Yeah.
Back then, all we had was VHS tapes. I'm dating myself. we had VHS tapes, and we had syndicated television. And syndicated television back then, it was nothing but enhancement matches. So it was nothing but like the guy they're building up against the quote unquote jobber. That's all it was. And seeing the big names like Hulk Hogan, you could only see them on Saturday night's main event at the time, which was, I think, once a quarter. Otherwise, they never competed on television. That's all I had access to. And I'm from a small Canadian town, so we didn't get live events in the town where I'm from. And so I had syndicated television and I had VHS tapes and magazines was the big thing that I had. And that was it. No YouTube, no Twitter, none of this instant gratification that we have today. And that's what I had. And that's what I used to be a fan.
You brought up the way fans might experience content of wrestling today. How do you think your fandom would be different if you had access to those things?
That's a good question. So to be honest with you, I think it's a lot harder to be a fan today than it was back then for a variety of reasons. One reason is there's just so much content accessible at your fingertips, more than there's ever been. There's more competition for eyeballs than there's ever been. And the other thing, quite honestly, I appreciate the internet. The internet has done great things for me personally. It's done great things for me financially. So I really appreciate the internet, but it makes it harder to be a fan. of pro wrestling, because now the curtain has been pulled back and that it is predetermined entertainment. When I was a kid, it was closed. And so I think if I was 10 years old and if I was a wrestling fan now, knowing that it is predetermined entertainment, I think that it would maybe take away a little bit of the interest for me. Because you really believed it back then. You really believed it. I have a memory of being, I think, 11 years old, and Macho Man Randy Savage drops the ring bell across the throat of Ricky Steamboat. I believed it. I thought Ricky Steamboat was going to have to retire. And this day and age, you wait a few weeks and they're going to be out there doing interviews, talking about the story. It's just different. It's just a different time, and the business has evolved.
So what about, you talk about the business evolving and things like that and stuff. What content do you think, if it was easier to access, was there anything that you struggled to access when you were a child that if you could access it now with that same fandom, you would get your hands on a bit more?
So not only could I not get live events when I was a kid, I couldn't get pay-per-view. When pay-per-view finally did start coming around, towards the late 80s, I couldn't get pay-per-view because I was from a small town. All I had was an antenna. You know what I mean? We didn't have cable. We didn't have cable television. And I remember the only thing I could do was try to find a news station the next morning that respected wrestling enough to show you highlights of say, WrestleMania. And that was hard to find because back then, most of the news outlets didn't treat wrestling with respect back then. Most of them kind of talked about it tongue in cheek and they kind of laughed at it. And that's why I always respected Arsenio Hall. If you remember who Arsenio Hall is, and I always respected Regis Philbin, because these were two talk show hosts that actually would have the wrestlers on their show and would actually kind of treat the business with respect. It was very difficult for me to just get March. I probably didn't see it till the summer that year, because that's how long it took for the tape to come out. That's just how it was. Now you can see everything instantly. You can even see highlights. If you don't want to pay for the event, you can see highlights on Twitter. But back then, you had to wait months in order to see the VHS tape. That's all I had.
Do you think there's more? You talk about instant gratification a lot, but do you think there's more like excitement over wrestling at times with the way you had to watch it than how you do today?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, the fan base has changed. I think a lot of the fans now, and I'm an old school guy, and I'll be the first to admit I'm an old school guy. And Sean Ross Sapp and I, we've had some debates on our podcast at Fightful, because I still like my pro wrestling when you can suspend your disbelief. I still like it when you can kind of get sucked into the moment. A lot of the fans now, they appreciate it as a performance art. And they understand that what's happening in the ring is performance. And so they care less about selling and they care less about psychology. And that stuff still matters to me. And so when I was a kid, I wish I could have gotten the event sooner than I could. But I would look forward to it, not necessarily because it took time to see it. I look forward to it because I bought it. Like I believe the story. I believe that Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant had a multi-year friendship that like went a and so that makes a difference, in how you look at
it. So you brought up Fightful a few times. How do you start in the wrestling media?
I'm sorry, you cut out there, Tom. Can you say that again?
Of course I can. So you've brought up Fightful and Sean a few times. How do you get started in the wrestling media itself?
Hope you have a few bucks. It's not cheap. So I will say this. I started money. I used to have a wrestling news website called knowyournews.com. And I shut that site down for a variety of reasons. And I knew that when the time was right, I was going to want to do it again, just for the fun of it. I enjoy the community aspect of it. I enjoy being able to talk to people like yourself that are fans of Fightful and fans of pro wrestling. I wanted to create a site when the time was right, but I didn't want to have to manage the day-to-day of it. And that's how I ended up finding a guy like Sean Ross Sapp to manage the day-to-day. But there's so much competition for eyeballs, like I mentioned, that you have to be you have to have perseverance. You have to be consistent. You have to have hustle. You have to not give up. I think a lot of people, they get the idea in their head, like a glorified idea. I'm going to have a YouTube channel and I'm going to create a website. And when they don't see the numbers that they expected they were going to see, I think they become discouraged. And a lot of sites that you see, or a lot of YouTube channels that you see, where maybe they're doing content every day, then suddenly they're doing it a few times a week, then suddenly they're doing it once every 2 weeks. They get discouraged because they're not getting the numbers that they thought. You have to be perseverant and you have to not get discouraged. And I told Sean Ross Sapp when we started Fightful, I'm not doing this for the money. So I'm going to give this time. And it took us 5 years in order to become break even. All the money that was being pumped out on salaries and on marketing and on video editing took 5 years to get that back. But we got there. And so now Fightful's doing really well. So I would tell anybody, do it for the love of it, not for the money. And success will come. If you're consistent and if you don't get discouraged, success will come, but it takes time.
You've brought up Sean a few times. How do you two connect?
How did we connect, or how do we connect, like on a daily basis?
Sorry, how do you connect to meet the first time?
So I went on the Google back in 2016. So I knew I was going to create this site, and I came up with the name Fightful. And I didn't want to manage the day-to-day of it. And I wanted somebody that, number one, they had to know pro wrestling. They had to know mixed martial arts, because I'm a fan of both of those things. At that particular time, Brock Lesnar was about to go back to the UFC to do another fight. Was
Mark this Hunt. During the Mark Hunt? Yeah, I was just going to say that.
That was the one. And so I wanted somebody that knew both. There was a lot of crossover happening at that time. Ronda Rousey was still in the UFC, but she was a big fan of pro wrestling. Matt Riddle, I think, had just left the UFC and was getting into wrestling at that time. There was a lot of crossover. So I wanted somebody that knew wrestling and who knew MMA and who could write and who could podcast. And I did a bunch of Google searches. And I came across a guy named Sean Ross Sapp, and I mean, no disrespect, he knows this. I never followed him. I didn't know who he was. I wasn't a regular visitor of Wrestling Inc., which is where he worked at the time. And so had a conversation with him. And I thought he was a good guy. And if I'm being honest, he was very cost effective. And so I gave him a shot, and it's worked out really well. And I always say that Fightful was a collaboration between him and myself. So I provided the platform and I provided the opportunity, and he put in the work, and it took both of us to get Fightful to where it is today. And I've always credited him with that.
That's really cool to hear. So you brought up there, obviously not being too familiar with his work pre-Fightful. How much did that help or even hinder you when you first started working with him and not knowing much about him? Did that help at all, or did it hinder you at all?
So what ended up getting him the job was a conversation with Bill Apter. So after I found Sean, and I had a phone conversation with Sean, I looked up a bunch of his podcasts that he had done. So I had a pretty good sense about what he was about. I saw that he used to work for One Wrestling, and I hit up Bill Apter. And you know, what's funny is, to this day, I think that Sean thinks that I talked to Bill Apter because I was considering Bill Apter for the job. That's not true. I hit up Bill Apter to get a referral on Sean. And so I said, hey, you know, you worked with this guy at One Wrestling. Tell me about him. And Bill Apter totally put Sean over. He totally said, he's the guy. He's a hard worker. And Bill Apter kind of sold me on him. Sean and I, when we started out, and I think anybody, when you kind of go into business with somebody, you're going to have to deal with this. We're different people. Sean and I are different people. I'm an older guy. I don't really get offended by anything. Sometimes I probably say something that's offensive and I don't even realize it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas totally. Sean has his finger kind of more on the pulse of social media, and Sean, I tease him about it. Sean is a much more sensitive guy than I am. And so it took a little bit of time for us to kind of figure each other out. Sometimes he would piss me off. Sometimes I would piss him off. We had a few arguments along the way, but now 6 years later, I think that we work together probably better than we ever have. Because I think we understand each other. I think we understand what we both bring to the table. And so our relationship's great now. You know, it never was bad, but now it's better than it ever has been, I think.
Obviously, as well, you two do a show on a Wednesday night called List and Your Boy. How different is your on-camera chemistry to your off-camera? when you're not streaming?
It's a very good question. So I'll tell you this. Early on, when we were doing that podcast, I had a life outside of Fightful, and I had a company that I owned outside of Fightful. My employees used to watch that podcast, and they would be shocked at how Sean talked to me on the podcast, because in my office, people just don't talk to me like that. And Sean joked that when he came up to Toronto, which is where I'm based, and went out with some of the employees said to him, I can't believe you talked to Jimmy like that, because that's just not how I was accustomed to being talked to. And I used to always tell Sean, the podcast to me is like entertainment, and I don't want you to walk on eggshells. I want you to kind of say what you want to say and do what you want to do, but just don't cross over that line of disrespect. And for the most part, that's been the case. I mean, there's been a few times, maybe where I would talk to Sean afterwards and say, it wasn't really a fan of this or that, or maybe I would tell him, hey, you're a little hard on this person. I want you to apologize to them. But for the most part, what you see on the podcast is entertainment. And when we're not on the podcast, I've always told Sean, say what you want to say. Don't be afraid. Don't hold back. I want your opinion. And so he's not afraid to share it. And we have arguments sometimes like anybody else in business, but it's nothing that we can't ever get past. And that's really about it. So the podcast more or less is real life, except Sean probably turns it up, turns the volume up a little bit, as they say.
You brought up there, and I'm really curious to know, but at the beginning of this conversation, not wanting to be involved in the day-to-day running of Fightful. Was there a reason for that? Was there a reason for that sort of
time?
Thing? Okay.
Yeah, time. So I had a full-time company to run. I had 40 employees. I've got 2 little kids. In order to be successful, and anybody that knows Sean will tell you the work he puts in. Sean busts his ass. Like he's got a really good work ethic. In order to be successful with Fightful, it required a big time commitment. And when we started, I told Sean, I don't want to be a news aggregator. I want to be a news breaker. I want to be a top destination for breaking news. And Sean told me I can do it, but the only way I can do it is if you will let me hire people to write aggregation stories, because other outlets break news too, and we have to cover them. So if you'll let me hire people to handle that, that will open up my time to cultivate news sources. That's how guys like Jeremy Lambert came to play, because Sean needed writers so that he could open up his schedule. He puts in a lot of hours, and there was no way on earth that I was going to have the chance to do that. And if I'm being very honest, do you see the shit Sean deals with on social media?
Yeah.
I have no tolerance for that. And so I'm cool with Sean being the face of it. I have no problem with it. I'm totally content kind of being in the background. And time was the main reason. I just didn't have the interest in doing the day-to-day.
When you started Fightful, where was your wrestling fandom?
I mean, obviously, as I've gotten older, so when you're younger, everybody goes through this. When you're younger, and entertainment is kind of the focal point of your life. Like whether it be television, video games. So when I was a kid, wrestling and hockey, because I'm Canadian, those were like major aspects of my life. But as I got older, you become an adult. Suddenly you got responsibilities. Then I have these 2 little people that rely on me for everything. You just get busier. And so things have to take a back seat. So my wrestling fandom in 2016 and even now in 2023 is not what it was, 20, 30 years ago. I still love the business, and I love the business at the heart of what I believe the business should be. So to me, what makes pro wrestling special to me is when you are able to get the people to believe. That to me is the magic of pro wrestling. And some people think otherwise. Some people think, oh, no. The magic of pro wrestling is just have the fans have fun, create fun for the fans. Maybe. For me, the magic pro wrestling is when you can make the people believe. And when I can watch a match in 2023 and I can get sucked into it and I can believe for even a brief moment that what I'm seeing is real, that to me is the magic. That still happens sometimes. It happens a lot less than when I was 10, but it still happens. And that's a reason that I'm still a fan. And that's the reason why I really like guys like Brock Lesnar, because when Brock Lesnar's out there, it's not very difficult to believe that what you're seeing could be real.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally. So what about where is your fandom in terms of what you watch currently? Do you check out Wrestling Weekly? Are you a monthly guy? Are you a clips guy? How do you express your fandom, shall we say?
I am a PVR and clips guy most of the time. Usually on Monday nights, we'll have Raw on because it's tradition. I've had Raw on Monday nights since '93. And so it's kind of just tradition. That's just kind of what you would do on a Monday. The rest of the week, I don't really have time to watch anything live, but I always watch everything, either PVR, or I shouldn't say everything. I don't watch the NWA. I don't watch Impact Wrestling. Joel Pearl and Cresta Star do a good job covering that for Fightful. But AEW, WWE, and major events. So let's say Wrestle Kingdom, I'll check out Wrestle Kingdom. But mostly PVR or clips because I just don't have time to watch everything live. Dynamite, SmackDown, I just don't watch it live. Pay-per-views I normally do, but I normally miss the first hour and then I have to catch up normally because of my family life. But that's my typical weekly schedule.
So have you ever given any thought to, I could not see this happening, Sean saying, I want to step away from Fightful for whatever reason? If that did happen, what would be your plan? Would you ever think, oh God, I've got to do the day-to-day now? What would be your plan sort of thing?
I would never do the day-to-day. No.
Okay.
No. If that were to happen, and you know what? There were times in the past when Sean was presented with opportunities, and he came to me and he said, I was presented with this opportunity. And he and I ended up, cutting a deal and he stuck around. And I think it might have been last year I gave him a minority interest in Fightful because I felt he deserved it.
Something like that.
Yeah. But you know what? If Sean ever came to me and said, hey, you know what? I think I want to focus on my Cincinnati Bengals Twitter channel. If that were to happen, you know what? I'd figure it out. Whether it mean finding a replacement for Sean, heaven forbid if it meant shutting down Fightful. This is not something that I do for a living. And I love having Fightful and it's great. And I love the community aspect. We've built up a really positive community. We have a lot of people now that work with us and for us. And there's just a lot of positivity about it. But if that were to happen, I'd figure it out. It's just, I just don't sweat stuff like that.
Does you talk about not doing this for the money? Does that aspect of it help with not sweating stuff like that, in your own words?
Oh, I imagine it probably does, right? I imagine that if I had to rely on Fightful to pay a mortgage, I'd probably be up nights thinking about, is Sean Ross Sapp happy? Is he happy? Do I have to worry about him getting an opportunity tomorrow? I'm sure it probably would. But from day one, I went into Fightful wanting to do it for the money or do it for fun. I wanted to do it as a pastime. And so from day one, because that was my mentality, I'm sure that probably has made a difference. And there were times over the first few years, Sean would hit me up because we didn't do well for a while. And Sean would hit me up and he'd say, do I need to look for another job? And I always told him, just keep rolling, keep doing what you're doing. And fortunately, it ended up working out. Now we're doing really well. But yeah, that, you know what? It's very possible. I mean, when I was running my company full time, if that ever went to shit, I'm sure that would have really been stressful because that was my way to make money. But Fightful isn't. And so I'm sure that probably does contribute to me not really worried about it.
What comes first after Fightful? Is it Grappling with Grief or Know Your News?
It depends on how you look at it. So Grappling with Grief is something that I do just to kind of honor. So without telling people my whole backstory, I lost my father and my sister both to cancer. My father in 2018, my sister in 2020. And I started Grappling with Grief as a way to deal with it. You know what I mean? I started it was basically as a way to channel that grief into something, maybe a little bit more positive. That's why I started it. But I don't do a lot with it day to day. I have a girl named Shandy Pace. She handles all the content for it. She interviews people for it. She writes articles for it. I don't make a dime off of it. I never will make a dime off it. It's completely just a nonprofit thing. And I have it out there for anybody that might have gone through what I went through. And maybe they just want to kind of look at something and read some people's stories to understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. But I don't put any effort into it aside from that. Know Your News is like Fightful. It's something that I do for fun. And it's something that I enjoy. I like stupid news. Tom, you couldn't believe how much stupid news exists every single day.
Oh, I could. I live in the UK.
it happens everywhere. But
Yeah.
so after Fightful, I'd probably say Know Your News. But I have a lot of interest offline that I would rank even above it. But
Mm,
in terms of online, Know Your News is second to Fightful for me.
mm. So you talked about your interests offline and wrestling and having a family. How do you make sure that you balance all of that and make sure that all of the sides of your brain, for lack of a better word, are happy?
uh, things take a backseat when you have kids. And anybody who has children will tell you there have been a lot of times where I would have loved to have gone to a show and I didn't go because, I got to help out with the kids. Sean's going to England, I think in June sometime
Money in
for
the bank
Money in the
or all
Bank,
in?
for Money in the Bank. And he's talking about potentially for All In, I think too. I would love to go to London for All In. I would love to experience it. I can't just because I have commitments and obligations here. And, going to London from Canada, you're not going for a day. You're
Oh
going for
no.
probably, a week. And I can't commit to it. So that is the biggest thing is that, the family comes first. And sometimes that stuff's got to take a back seat. I just told my wife the other day, as we're doing this, my hockey team, the Edmonton Oilers, they're in the Stanley Cup playoffs in the National Hockey League. And I told my wife, if they go to the finals, I want to go to Edmonton for a couple of games. And my wife is already busting my chops saying, well, what am I going to be a single mom for 3 days? So that's what happens. And so things got to take a back seat. And so I don't get to go as many events as I would like to, but I try my best to take in what I can.
I could just imagine. Have you seen The Big Bang Theory at all?
Yeah, a few times. Yeah.
Well, there's this episode where Howard wants to go to Comic Con, and Bernadette basically says, "You have to do all the household chores for a month, and then maybe I'll think about it." I could just imagine it being a bit like that.
Somewhat. I'm sure that there'd have to be a give and take, and I'm sure I'd have to promise something. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I always, I pick my battles too. It's like, okay, do I want to go to All In that badly that I will then have to deal with the consequences and deal with the nonsense? And so I look at it like, no, you know what? I can probably skip on that one. But going to a hockey game in the finals, I'd probably choose the consequences on that. We'll see.
Fair enough. I don't know why I went on a tangent about The Big Bang Theory. I do apologize.
No problem. Hey, we like what we like.
Yeah,
so no
definitely.
Problem.
So when it comes to Know Your News and stuff like that, you talk about these all being like passion projects and for fun. What has been the most ridiculous news story that you found that you've been like, that's not real? Come on now.
With Know Your News?
Yeah.
There's so many that it's hard to narrow it down to one. There's so many. I mean, on a weekly basis, we have different podcasts that we do where we cover different quote unquote stupid news stories. We do different video features. I personally seek out a lot of these stories on my own. And then a lot of them are sent to me by people that know that I do this. And the way the internet is, I always have to question if it's real. I always have to question if it's set up. I'm sure we've reported on stories that were made up because, sometimes people, they know how to get their tracks covered just enough that it's hard to tell the difference. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of one because there's so many crazy ones. I mean, I was just doing content the other day, and there was a story about a guy in India in a way to try to beat the heat in India, and in a way to try to cool down the inside of his car, he smeared cow shit all over the outside of his car.
No.
Because he said, "Oh, this will keep the inside cool. I'm just going to smear cow shit all over the outside of the car." And I saw pictures of it, and it's like, okay, but is that really cow shit? Or are you just telling me that it is?
Yeah.
So it's hard to really ever tell, but there is no shortage of content for that kind of a channel. Just as there's really no shortage of content for a pro wrestling channel either.
You've brought up Fightful again there. I should have asked you this during the Sean discussion. I do apologize. It's just where my brain goes.
Ask me anything about Sean that you want. No problem.
Where do you think Fightful would be without Sean Ross Sapp?
In case he watches this, how much do I say?
He won't watch this.
So I will say this. So without Sean, would Fightful exist? Yes. If I hadn't have hired Sean, I would have hired somebody else. and Fightful would exist. Would Fightful be as successful as it is now without Sean? Probably not. I think that he was the right guy in the right place. By his own admission, I joke with him sometimes about what he told me in our initial conversations when I first met him, because he told me things like, "Oh, I'm not really known for breaking news stories." He said, "I'm the number 3 guy at Wrestling Inc." I've always remembered him saying that. He just needed an opportunity, and I provided it for him. So he was the right guy at the right time. And so if he wasn't there, Fightful would still exist, but probably wouldn't be where we're at. And so I give him full props for that.
Do you view Fightful as a success overall?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, over the first 5 years, it was a struggle. And we weren't profitable, like I said. But within the last couple of years, things just changed. I think a lot of it had to do with certain stories that Sean broke, like stories about CM Punk and coming back to wrestling and things like that really kind of put us on the radar. Initially, when other outlets would cover stories that we broke, they would question the validity of it because they didn't know who we are. Now, if Fightful broke it, they take it to the bank now. And that's a major difference. Fievel Select, which I teased Sean, was my idea, and he didn't want to do it. And now it is, without question, the number 1 wrestling Patreon in the space. Fievel, I think, has been a big success. I'm very happy with where it's gone. And that's about all I can say. Things are going really well.
That's really cool to hear. I know it's public knowledge that Sean didn't want to do the paywall and you did. He told me why he didn't during the conversation. But why did you feel like it was important?
That's where everything was headed. So when I was looking at the landscape and I wasn't even just looking at pro wrestling news, I was looking at news in general. When I was looking at the landscape, everything was going direct to consumer. And what I mean by that is major news publications, they were all going to subscription services. All the major newspapers. When you look at some of the wrestling outlets like The Observer, PW Insider, they were already subscription-based. Streaming services. So even content now is going direct to consumer with streaming services. That's where everything was headed, was direct to consumer and subscription services. And I told Sean, our ability to make a profit strictly based on ad revenue, it's not what it was 20 years ago. Like, it's just much more difficult. And so this is the way to do it. This is where everything is going. And so that's what I wanted to do. And he didn't think it was going to work. He was dead set against it. And I had to ultimately kind of put my foot down and say, well, this is what we're doing.
Did you pull rank, for lack of a better word?
Oh, absolutely. I did. I mean, Sean will tell you, like, I told him this is what we're doing. Like, we just have to, and this is what we're doing. And it worked out great. And again, to Sean's credit, he was fully on board with it. He committed to it. And now I think we've got it down to a science. You know what I mean? And so it's doing really well. And you know what? I tease Sean sometimes about his compensation because he does very well now. and I tease him about it, but it's because of Select, and he grew Select. So it's just like Fightful. Select is kind of follows the same path where I came up with the idea and Sean ran with it and made it successful. And so
that's very cool. One thing I am curious to know, you told me off camera that you sometimes don't get a lot of time to check out the Fightful content overall. If I'm speaking out of turn on that, I do apologize, and I will edit that out. But who at Fightful do you believe is doing good work, and you're like, I'd like to see them do more, maybe, and things like that?
If anybody wasn't doing good work, Sean would know about it.
Fair enough.
So I think everybody pulls their own weight. I think everybody does good work. As Fightful has gotten, successful, and as our numbers have grown, we have compensated people accordingly. So people have gotten raises as Fightful's done better. I think everybody does a great job. And there have been so many times where Sean will say, "Oh, did you see this? Did you see that?" And I'm like, "No," because I just don't get to watch most of the Fightful content. But or any content. It's not like I'm out there watching all these other wrestling YouTube channels. I don't really have time to watch much of anything. But no, I don't have any complaints with anybody. Like I said, we have a really positive community with Fightful. Everybody gets along. There's no egos. We just have a really positive community, and I'm happy with that everybody's contributed.
That's really cool. But as we look at wrapping this up, Jimmy, very soon, we are going to do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my videos before, you'll know this is the segment where I ask my guests questions they might get asked on social media, such as Jimmy's favorite match, favorite wrestling pay-per-view, favorite wrestler's theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Questions.
Jimmy, how come you haven't fired Sean Ross Sapp?
You should not.
Yeah, oh, get that on Twitter.
Fair enough.
I get that on Twitter.
I like Sean, so I'm not going to ask that question. But yeah, questions that he might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So what's your favorite match of all time?
That's a tough question. So, I know that there's going to be certain fans that are going to shit on me for this, but that's okay. So I am an older guy, like I said, and Triple H has done some interviews where he has said it's not about the moves or the matches, it's about the moments. And I fully believe that. And a few times I've criticized the young talent today because they take all these high risks. And I don't see the point. Like, I don't see how you're going to hurt your longevity. If you're in your early 20s, do you want to still be wrestling in your mid 30s? So I don't agree with that style. I am all about the moments. And so for me, my favorite match of all time probably is still Macho Man Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, WrestleMania 3. I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. And it got a lot of props for being a great in-ring match, but that's not why I love it. That's one reason, I suppose, but why I love it is the story going in. The story going in was that Randy Savage was this unbeatable champion who treated his manager like shit. Ricky Steamboat got injured with the ring bell, was supposed to retire, made the big comeback, and decided, I'm going to get even with you, not by hurting you in the ring. I'm going to get even with you by taking the one thing that means more to you than anything, and that's the Intercontinental Championship. And that was the story going in. And so I love the story. I love the characters. I love the match. That's still my favorite. And I'm still a big, Hogan slams Andre guy. I've seen that body slam hundreds of times. Shitty match, great finish. And so, I'm all about the moments. I'm all about the moments. I look at it like, if you want to do a Canadian destroyer off the top rope through a table, you'll get a pop that night, but by the next show, it'll be forgotten. If you can come up with a moment, people are going to remember that weeks, months, even years later. And so I'm a moment guy more so than a match guy.
I have never thought of it like that, but that is a very cool way of thinking about it. What about your favorite pay-per-view overall?
Favorite pay-per-view. So it was either WrestleMania 3 for the obvious reasons or WrestleMania 17. WrestleMania 17 was the one where top to bottom, the card was just strong. Every match was strong. And so I would probably go with those two, either WrestleMania 3 or WrestleMania 17.
That is very cool. What about your favorite wrestler's theme overall?
Theme? Oh, music?
Yeah, as in music they come out to.
That's a good question. Just off the top of my head, I'm going to go with Edge. Maybe it's because, he's a good Canadian boy from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. But his song is just fantastic. It has held up over the years. And I really like it. Yeah, I'll go with Edge.
People like me when it comes to Edge, where you watch his older stuff and he hasn't got You Think You Know Me, and it's like, that is very strange. Like his 2002 thing, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he went through a couple different tunes at different times, but Alter Bridge is the right song. And it fits him great. And I really like it when he's coming out to that music, you're ready to go, when he's making his entrance. Definitely.
What about your favorite tag team?
Either the British Bulldogs, which I'm sure you'll appreciate.
Yep, definitely.
The British Bulldogs or the Steiner Brothers. I love the Steiner Brothers. If anybody watching this, if you weren't a WCW fan, go back and watch some of their stuff. They were so innovative. Everything they did, it looked like it was going to kill you. The Steiners were amazing. So I would go with the Bulldogs or the Steiners.
And then finally, as we wrap this up, who is your favorite wrestler of all time? I
have to go by era or by period because Yeah, I don't have an all-time favorite. So my very first favorite of all time was Andre the Giant. And again, you know, if you're a newer fan, you might not even know who the hell Andre the Giant is. If he stood in the
That's
ring
just
today with
blasphemy. I hope
it could be, it could be. Well, you know what? If he stood in the ring today with Omos, he might not look so impressive.
Ooh.
But back in the mid 80s when there was nobody like him, he just had this aura about him, and he was a very underrated worker. Andre the Giant was an excellent worker in his younger days. And he's my very first favorite. So I was a big Andre the Giant guy. After him, Macho Man Randy Savage was my guy. He was a phenomenal Intercontinental Champion. He took on everybody. He was kind of like Gunther today. He took on everybody. And so I love Randy Savage.
I'd like to see.
That would have been very interesting, right? Savage in his prime. And then after Savage, it was Bret the Hitman Hart. I'm Canadian through and through. Bret Hart was iconic in Canada. And so I was a Bret Hart guy. And after Bret Hart, probably Brock Lesnar would be the last one. I've loved Brock Lesnar since he started out. Like I said, when he's out there, it's so easy to get caught up in the moment with him. And he is so underrated as a worker. He is elite level as a worker. And a lot of his peers say that in interviews. A lot of his peers talk about how good Brock is, how smart he is. And he moved to Canada. Good for you, Brock Lesnar. So he's probably cool. He's probably my most recent favorite.
That's very cool. But as we wrap this up, Jimmy, the question I end all my interviews on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general. We're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very weird way if you think about the world. So what is one piece of content you want to be remembered for, and one that you're like, if the world could get rid of that from their brains, I would appreciate it.
A piece of content that I could be remembered for?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really. So when it comes to Fightful, and when it comes to Know Your News, and when it comes to, you know, YouTube channels and stuff like that, that's not really anything that I really need to be remembered for. You know, I don't aspire to be any kind of a celebrity or anything like that. So I don't really look at it like I want to be remembered for a piece of content. I want to be remembered for being a good father. I want to be remembered for being a good husband. I want to be remembered for being a good friend, for being fair to, you know, my staff. I'd rather be remembered for that stuff than be remembered for a podcast that I did on Fightful kind of thing. And in terms of what I would, I'd hope that content could be forgotten. Maybe some of my takes that might be considered old school or out of touch. Maybe Sean and I had a couple of fights on the air on Listen Your Boy. Wow. Maybe a couple of those could get tucked away. But for the most part, anybody that knows me will tell you I don't really regret anything I do. I don't care about negative feedback. I don't care about troll comments. I ignore all of it. And anybody that's watching this, and, you know, Tom, as your channel grows, you're going to deal with it too. Misery loves company. And so whenever you have any kind of success, especially in a public social media world, the trolls are going to be there. And it's not necessarily because they don't like what you're doing. It's because they're probably jealous of what you're doing, and because they're miserable in their own lives, and they want to try to bring you down to their level and make you as miserable as they are. Ignore it. I ignore it. Means nothing to me. And so any piece of content I put up that people might look at and cringe, for the most part, I can shrug my shoulders and say, yeah, is what it is. Deal with it. And that's how I would look at it.
That's very cool. And something that I will remember as my channel gets bigger. But as we wrap this up, Jimmy, where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
Twitter is probably the place where you're going to find me most of the time. At JimmyVan74 is my Twitter account. Or if you go to Fightful.com, I'm sure you can find me there somewhere, or KnowYourNews.com. And that's it. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, man. Like I said, might be the only one I ever do where questions are not asked by Fightful staff. And it was a pleasure for me to talk to you. I love what you're doing. I love your hustle, and keep doing it. Keep doing it. Don't give up. Don't get discouraged. Keep doing it. Your numbers are growing, and they'll continue growing if you're consistent.
I do just want to take a second to say thank you for all the love recently. We have grown quite a bit recently. Thank you to the amazing Jimmy Van for agreeing to come on. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash on YouTube, and follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash, and I will see you in the next video. A goodbye now.